Good morning, good morning, good morning. Happy Saturday. It's early. It's great. So welcome to the Fairfield Area Chamber of Commerce Legislative Forum. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Mindy McAdams, the Executive Director. The format of this is, we all know what we're doing now. This is not our first rodeo. Our local representatives will introduce themselves and talk a little bit about what they've been working on, and then we'll open it up to questions and answers. As always, please be respectful. Remember that we're all adults, and be kind. We need to thank our sponsors who allow us to have this as an open, free, public event, and also the coffee and donuts. So Freeman Cavanides Law Firm has sponsored all 4 sessions. Fairfield Community School District also sponsored all 4 sessions, and the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center have sponsored all 4 sessions. So we want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. We appreciate your sponsorship. So let's introduce our local friends who we all know and love. District 44 Senator Adrian Dickey, District 88 Representative Helena Hayes, and District 89 Representative Jeff Shipley. So if you can pick who goes first.
Good morning, everyone. Jeff Shipley, District 87, Van Buren County, Fairfield, Mount Pleasant. Thank you to the Chamber for having us. Thank everyone for coming out this morning, especially those who drove in from out of town. A lot of big things happening. It's been a little while since we connected in February, so thank you for Mendy for rescheduling us and making sure we get as much time with you as possible. I know the biggest topic at the Capitol to kind of get out of town is the tax discussion. Property taxes, income taxes, sales taxes, it's all kind of on the table, and it seems like there's a lot of different ideas floating around on how to best ease the tax burden on Iowans. The economic situation is still, a little bit shaky in terms of long-term planning and forecasting, although, I mean, the state's overall budget is doing very, very well. But a lot of institutions, the big news that rocked our community a couple weeks back was Iowa Wesleyan University, which had had sustained financial trouble for a number of years, finally folded up. So certainly an end of an era over in Mount Pleasant, but thankfully a lot of people in the community have already stepped up working to prepare for whatever the next chapter holds. The education discussion, I mean, I'm just really, really impressed, just the number and the volume of bills and kind of the breadth of the topics. I really am happy with a lot of the progress that the legislature has made on addressing education issues. I think there's a lot more to do in terms of getting to the source of the problem when we look at, say, faltering student achievement or youth mental and behavioral health. We've actually had a couple conversations about that. A couple weeks ago, the House passed a bill which would require mental health services being published on the back of state IDs. It is a little bit of an unfunded mandate. It is a little bit controversial. I voted against it, but it did trigger kind of a really important discussion on just where we're at in terms of what is the best practices for supporting the mental health of our children and making sure everyone has access to mental health resources around the clock across the entire state. Which is still, a lot of gaps there that we need to be knowledgeable on. And I guess just my kind of comment on that is, I look at it kind of from two ways. There's certainly the treatment end where, access to treatment and making sure people have the tools they need to cope or therapy for their mental illnesses, but also kind of the prevention side and the rate of growth that we're seeing. So that's something we talked a lot about on the campaign trail. And we brought it up on the floor of the House a couple weeks ago, is just the rate of growth that when you look at the data from recently, last couple of years to 10 years ago, a lot of these indicators have doubled in terms of children having suicidal ideations or having feelings of persistent hopelessness, that it's doubled, or in some cases more than doubled in the last 10 years. And so unless we are able to address what's driving the rate of growth there, and it's likely a confluence of multiple different factors. And so again, just a really, really important conversation we all need to have in terms of supporting individuals for you know, their overall health and wellness and well-being for not just now, but far into the future, and really just having a good conversation of what that looks like. And even something as simple as kindness certainly goes a long way. So anyway, that's a little bit of touch on a lot of different things. Really excited to see what you guys want to talk about this morning, and thanks again for the opportunity.
And I am Helena Hayes. I don't actually represent the city of Fairfield for the Iowa House. That is just Jeff's territory. But I do represent part of Jefferson County, which is the upper portion of the county, excluding the upper half of it, excluding Fairfield. So all the rural areas in the northern part. So I also represent all of Keokuk County in the Iowa House and most of Mahaska County. So last forum that Senator Dickey and I did in Oskaloosa, what, a week ago? 2 weeks ago already? They teased me about filibustering, so I'll try not to talk so much this time. So I know we have some new people back here today. I was talking to one of the young ladies that has come back to a forum for the first time. Where are you at? I think in the middle. Hello. Always good to see new faces here. I'd love to see a larger crowd, a younger crowd, a diverse crowd, because the truth is, politics has to remain local, and the people in your community need to be engaged, either at the school board level, the city council, forums like this, any manner possible, because this is your community and you need to be the ones speaking into it. So I'm, just so you know, those of you that don't know me too well, I'm one of the people I would call was red-pilled with COVID. So a couple years ago, I kind of woke up to politics, and so I'm probably the newest one up here in terms of what's going on politically and being, this is my first time to be in an elected position. So I'm thoroughly enjoying it. It is absolutely amazing, and I love it because the best part about it is people. And it's nonstop conversations and dialogue at the Capitol all day long. And that is truly politics at its best. So I really enjoy it. There's been some fabulous topics, some issues that we've been addressing quite strongly. And then some not so like controversial, you wouldn't think, such as the bill we spent a lot of time this week talking about in regards to specific dog breed bans in cities. And we, in my community, in Keokuk County, that's actually a big issue. Keota has a dog breed ban, and they spent a lot of money defending that recently. And so does Council Bluffs. And so that's been an interesting conversation in the House, and you probably haven't had that at all in the Senate.
The bill started in the Senate.
Oh, this was your
No,
fault.
it's not my bill. I agree with you. I hate the bill. I agree with you.
Yeah. Everything seems to come from the Senate. No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Rarely.
So, that's what we're doing this week, though. Of course, as you know anything about how the process works at the Capitol, we're past the second funnel, so all of the House bills went over to the Senate bills came over to the House, and that's what we've been doing a lot of conversation about. And once they've survived those committees for those weeks, they remain live, and they're still possibly able to be passed this session. So we only have 2 weeks left, and then we'll all be back to our normal lives, right? Normal? I think so. I don't know if anything ever goes back to normal, but I welcome your guys' questions. Thank you for being here on this beautiful Saturday morning. I know a lot of you are itching to get into your garden and outside, so thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Good morning. Again, like Helena said, thank you for being here. I appreciate the yummies, and I know we all enjoy the fun little treats this weekend, but please keep in mind the real reason with Easter, and I hope you all celebrate it for those purposes. Helena mentioned a couple more weeks. Well, she's much more optimistic than I am. Even though our last payday in session is April 28th, I don't think there's a chance we'll be done by then. I think we'll be going into May. That's been the trend the last couple years. hope it's not the case, but I just don't think. And the main reason why that happens is what's happened the last couple of years is budgets. You know, the last 2 years was about the same thing. I think this year the House budget's about $95 million more than the Senate or the governor's budgets, and we can't adjourn until a budget's agreed to. And I can certainly say from the Senate side that we're very proud in sending the numerous tax cuts, whether it's been property tax, income tax, over the last several years, and we will continue to do that. And you can't do that if you're a little bit, well, not a little bit, if you're just undisciplined on your budgets. So there's a lull right now between the House and the Senate on that, and you know, we'll see. It'd be nice to be done by the 28th, but we'll just see what happens. Helena mentioned a dog bill. That started in the Senate, but we haven't voted on it, so there must have been a companion bill introduced in the House. And what it basically, the one in the Senate, I assume the House is the same thing. Currently, any local jurisdiction can ban certain breeds of dogs if they like. I'm aware of this because Packwood's had that for 35, 40 years. We've banned pit bulls, and I'm fully in favor of the ability to do that. The bill says that local jurisdictions can't ban certain breeds of dogs. I'd be surprised if there's any movement or momentum on that bill. Like I said, it was introduced in the Senate, but we didn't have a debate on it. So I think that's certainly an area we're going to give local control back to the local communities. Last big bill that I have personally this year is the youth labor bill. It's been kind of on the back burner the last 2 weeks. What we've really been working on is budgets and trying to get some common ground and getting a budget together that both sides can agree on. But I think you'll start seeing next week that a lot more floor debate will start to pick up with the legislation that's left ahead of us. So thanks for being here.
Okay, if you would like to ask a question, please approach the microphone in the back.
Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate it. Appreciate your service. Couple of things. I'm a homeowner in Fairfield. Just noticed that my tax bill went up 34% this year. And I guess that's the bad news. The possible good news is that our tax is supposed to track market value. Guess that's the first question I have.
I didn't hear a question there.
Oh, our tax is supposed to track, assessed value is supposed to track market value.
They are, when assessors, and you guys jump in here too, because quite frankly, as a newbie up here, taxes have been one of my least favorite topics, even though.
Mine too.
What'd you say?
Mine too.
Yeah, even though it seems that politicians a lot of times are like, oh yeah, everybody's talking about taxes. I know when I door knocked, nobody talked about taxes besides maybe complaining they, had a high property tax. One thing you want to keep in mind with that is that when the assessor sets those values, they look at what has been sold and bought right in your area. And so those values are set according to that, correct?
Yeah.
And so.
Of course.
Comparables.
Yes.
Sure, comparables, yeah.
Comparables. And one thing that you want to keep in mind too, just because, let's say your assessed value doubles, just for simplicity's sake.
Not that far away, I think.
I know. We've been hearing this a lot lately. Across the state, this has been the case. I got mine this week too, and my home went up $40,000 in value, or in assessed value. Keep in mind that just because, let's say, theoretically it doubles in assessed value, doesn't necessarily mean directly that your rate will double, okay? Because there is a cap on that, a 3% cap, that it can be raised each year. Does anybody want to jump in that?
Sure. What property value is going? There we go, sorry. Property values going up is not a bad thing. It's not, you're not upset about your property value going up. What you're upset about is the tax bill that could go up as well.
That's right.
A good example is, let's say, to try to oversimplify it, let's say there's a town of 10 homes, and each home's valued at $10, okay? And the city comes in and says, well, how much money do we need to run? And the city determines they need a total of $10 a year to operate. So every home, like value, are assessed $1 property tax, okay? Let's say the next year the valuations go up for whatever reason. Those homes go from $10 to $100, okay? Now there's 10 homes at $100 values, there's $1,000 of valuation in the community. But the towns theoretically should only need $10 to operate, right? It's what they needed last year. They shouldn't go from $10 to $100, okay? That rate there is where the county assessors, or the counties, adjust your property tax, because just because your values went up doesn't mean that their needs to operate the county or the city, whatever it may be, goes up proportionally as well. So I hear everybody talking about the property taxes or the valuations going up, and I agree, mine went up. I mean, I don't know who's really probably didn't go up, but that's not to say that your property taxes are going to go up that much as well if your governing entity lowers that percentage, that rate. I believe it's called the mill rate, but they lower that rate. So unlike Helena, excuse me, I like taxes, but not paying them, right? I'm on Ways and Means. I like finding ways to lower our taxes. It's a challenge, but as I've told every group, and Helena mentioned that she didn't hear a lot of conversation on taxes. Well, probably because they reached out to me then, because I hear tons of emails and conversations about taxes, and it typically is property taxes. It's two things. It's thank you for the tax reductions you've done in the last couple of years, or my property taxes are too darn high. And one thing I think we all have to be very fair with our, with the cities or the counties or whoever it is where your taxing authority is. If you're wanting and demanding to pay less, you're probably going to have to expect to get a little bit less as well. I mean, if you think your property taxes are too high and we're going to put things in place to try to slow that growth or even reverse it, it's common sense that there's a chance. I mean, there's some maybe tightening that these entities can do, but there is a good chance you're going to receive less services. So please keep that in mind when you go to your local officials and complain about your property taxes, and if they do something to lower them, that there is a trade-off to that.
Thanks very much. My second question is, and my last question, can you talk about your views on the eminent domain bill that just failed?
Sure. Well, thank you, Dave, for being here. Just on that property tax piece, so real quick, I think there's a lot to this, and I'm still a little bit naive, but I mean, every time we've been up there, it's something we've talked about, and I know we've passed bills in the past, but the problem seems to be getting worse. There's kind of two sides of it. One is the assessed valued the assessment piece, and then is in how high is the levy actually. Every county is going to be a little bit different, but we've been hearing complaints from all across the state on this, and yeah, we need to make sure local governments are whole. But for example, one thing that's kind of come up is, recently, I think a couple years ago, the state took off the mental health responsibility, and we started funding that from the state. But a lot of county governments, instead of lowering what they were levying for that, they just kept that in place and kind of just builds and grows on top of it, rather than anyone kind of scaling things back. So I think just the only other thing I wanted to mention is it does become a problem when you have people on fixed incomes and houses that they, invested in their whole entire life and paid off, and they're hoping to have negligible expense in retirement, and then all of a sudden the property tax becomes a growing expense, and if you're on a fixed income, that can cause a lot of problems. So I just appreciate you voicing the concern on the issue, and I hope we can make more progress on it and tighten our belt, so to speak, at a local level to make sure that we're funding the services that are most, the citizens are most reliant on. I voted in favor of the bill. We did pass a bill out of the House, which would have restricted eminent domain to if they would have 90% voluntary easements obtained. So I was happy to support that bill. I personally could have gone a couple steps further. I think there's still, and there was other pieces of that bill. There were several things it did. In the final version, one thing that cut out was the ability of a local government to kind of institute their own ordinance regulation, or in Van Buren County had been wanting to do a ordinance on safety in terms of just how deep, the pipes would have to be buried, from how far back from roads or from schools or residences. And they even had something in there to say that there couldn't be a seamed pipe underneath a roadway. So they had, a lot of real smart pipe fitter type folks weigh in on the ordinance. Anyway, so that part of the bill that would have respected local government's ability to do that got stripped out. I don't know, the bill's future on what the Senate's going to decide to do, if they're going to take any action at all. I think there still is a lot of politics at the Iowa Utilities Board, where ultimately the decision still does rest with them. But yeah, I was happy to support the bill in the House. I was very happy with the Iowa Farm Bureau for weighing in on the issue and finding what I felt was a very agreeable compromise position to get to that 90% number. So we'll see what happens with these projects. I don't think this debate is going to end anytime soon. It's possible that we still could be talking about these things next year.
Thanks very much. Any other comments on eminent domain from either of you?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I would love to comment on that.
Thank you.
I do want to harken back a little bit to your tax question real quick. The legislative website, if you go to iowalegislature.org, there is a legislative guide to local property tax. That website's a little bit of a challenge to use because there's a lot on there, but I encourage you guys to go on there and just learn more about how property taxes work. It talks about all the exemptions, the different kinds of levies, the officials, how to appeal, how to appeal the process, credits that can be applied to property tax, all kinds of stuff. So the biggest thing when it comes to taxes is that there's just a lot of misinformation, and then also just unknowns that people don't know. So educate yourself, because truly, just like anything, if you're getting a lot of high taxes, it's because a budget is higher than you want to see. A local budget. Property taxes are all local budgets. So not what we're setting. We're not setting any of that at the state level. So yes, eminent domain. So eminent domain, in case there's anybody in here who doesn't understand what that means, is the idea that the government or private entities can come in and force you to give sell your land or go across your land without your permission, forcing you to agree to something that you may not want to. So since before the primary that I was in last year, I have been fairly vocal about this issue. I absolutely do not agree with eminent domain, and private property has to be protected. This is something that we stand on quite vigorously in America in general, and especially in Iowa here, is our private property rights. In the bill that Representative Shipley was talking about, one of the things that did get attached to that before we sent it over to the Senate was was it called a task force or a, there's different names for, help me out here.
Study group.
A what?
Study group.
A study, yeah, like a study group or task force. They mean a little bit different things here, but basically one of the things was to really have a deep conversation across the board about eminent domain in the future in Iowa, because the carbon pipeline has only been one aspect of it. There's a lot of other things that are being talked about that want to utilize eminent domain, including some transmission lines, including this is a new concept that's coming to Iowa, where you pull that methane gas off of sewage.
Digesters.
What do you call
The
it?
digesters.
Oh, digesters. I always forget that name because it doesn't seem like it would be called a digester. When I think of digesting, I think of like breaking down, but they're going to capture that gas, mostly methane, and pipe it to a facility for use of like methane, which you would use in your home. And some companies are seeking permission to use right-of-ways in roads on that, and it'd be a much smaller pipe than in the carbon pipeline. But certainly there needs to be a much larger conversation when it comes to eminent domain issues, because we're seeing a lot of those being challenged with private companies, and the questions of public use versus private good or public gain, or private gain, excuse me. I do want to, I do want to acknowledge too that they did a poll recently, and 74% of Iowans said eminent domain is really important to them. This is an issue, again, that needs to be discussed more. So certainly, the carbon pipeline goes through my district. In Mahaska County, it goes through the entire county diagonally. It affects a lot of landowners. A little corner of Keokuk County, and then it comes into, does it even go into Jefferson at all? It does,
Yep.
okay. I couldn't remember how far it goes down here. So I sent out a letter and invited all my landowners in my district up to the Capitol for this particular discussion on eminent domain and carbon pipelines. And I had a fairly good crowd, 30, 40 people maybe, that came to just learn about the legislative process, to have conversations with other people who know a lot more about the carbon pipeline, and specifically the credits that are being used for that, the 45Q and 45Z credits, and how all that was incentivizing this project, and perhaps what they could do about this. So yeah, definitely an important issue to me. I'm glad you asked the question. And yes, we absolutely need to protect our private property rights.
Thanks.
So the bill did pass out of the House. I forget the bill number, but it's over in the Senate. I don't know if I'd say it's dead, because nothing's ever really dead at the Capitol until the gavel falls on the last day, but it missed the final deadline. Really what had happened was it came out of the House. I'm not criticizing the House, but it came out of the House so late on one particular week that the committee the committee in the Senate, the Commerce Committee, would have had a subcommittee and a committee hearing on it for it then to pass that same week in the Senate, and the time didn't allow for that. But it could come back up. I mean, like I said, nothing's dead until the gavel falls. Myself, I don't like the pipeline. I would have supported the bill that came from the Senate, or excuse me, the bill that came over from the House. I would have supported that. I'm not a fan of it, and maybe not as much because of the eminent domain issue, but it's because of some of the actors involved. We got 3 pipelines and proposal projects in Iowa: Summit, Navigator, and Wolf. And what I think is really unfortunate, the more I hear, I think this is my 9th forum this session, so you hear a lot about it, but the practices of the Navigator pipeline, that's the one through our area, their negotiating practices, whatever you want to call it, is much, much different than Summit's. I'm not so sure about the one about Wolf's, but I talked to my legislators in northern Iowa that had the Summit pipeline go through it, and while they may or may not support the project, I think I get the feel that if there's opposition to the project in the areas where Summit is, it's not because they're opposed to Summit, they're just opposed to the project. And you get down here, and more people I talk to, it's almost the distaste is because of the manner that the Navigator people have tried to secure rights for property. Is more like a thug tactic. That's probably a little extreme, but just much more harsh and abrasive, put it that way. Here's the offer, take it. If not, we're going to get it via eminent domain, flaunting it to them. And I think that's pretty disappointing, and that's why there's a different kind of opposition on the pipeline here than it is in other parts of the state. I think if the people from Navigator were handling their business in the way that the people for Summit were, it'd be maybe not quite as much distaste. But with that being said, I don't support it. I don't believe in the whole issue on it, the carbon sequestration. Whether the Senate will vote on it, it really comes down to whether there's the votes. If there's the votes for it, there's 26 votes, they'll probably run it. That's just how it works in the Senate. They don't run legislation that doesn't have the votes to support it. so you understand where I'm at on the pipeline. I want to give you a little different perspective. This isn't, I just don't want people to say that I am in favor of the pipeline when I give you this perspective, okay? But it's a side of the story that none of us really have heard. So let's say we pass legislation that stops the use of eminent domain or prevents the use for that in these pipelines, okay? Then probably what's going to happen, and again, this isn't my favor, this is just what's probably going to happen. What will probably happen is the 3 pipeline projects will sue the state of Iowa. And it'll be hundreds of millions of dollars. They'll sue them for loss of you know, the expenses that they've already incurred or monies they've already paid. They will sue the state for that, and they will probably win. And that largely means a lot of the tax cuts and a lot of the things we're doing in the state are going to go away. Because it's a lawsuit that we will probably lose.
Why is that? Why would you lose the suit?
I'm getting there. The reason that is in, I think it's in 1992, the legislator said that carbon is a hazardous material, okay? With a bunch of other stuff, but somewhere they said carbon is a hazardous material. And years later, early 2000s, when they were addressing the use of eminent domain, the use of eminent domain could be used for transportation of hazardous material. Okay, you can connect the dots right there. I mean, the law currently allows the use of eminent domain for the transportation of hazardous material, which they've already defined carbon being that. Okay, it may be connecting dots from years to get to that, but essentially these pipelines, when they started, it was illegal. If they needed to use eminent domain, legally it was a tool available to them. Okay, so if the state goes in and changes the rules in the middle of the game and stops their project, or they can't use eminent domain, then the state very, very realistically could be on the hook financially. It's a lawsuit we would probably lose. Okay,
Is it a constitutional issue?
I don't know is what a constitutional issue. Your property rights, maybe,
Yeah.
but that's not really the issue I'm talking about. Okay, again, and you're kind of already taking like I'm standing up for the pipeline. I am not. Okay, I'll say it again. I am not in favor of this pipeline coming through, especially with the tactics that many of them are using to try to secure the property to do it. Okay. Don't twist my words around. I'm not saying you were, but please, no one twist my words around because of everything else that I'm saying. I'm just giving a different side of what could happen to the state.
I wasn't making that assumption.
Okay, thank you. So, that is part of the problem. I think that's part of the reason why there's not 26 votes in the Senate right now to support an issue on the pipeline. I will also say that without specifying specific names, there's 3 different pipeline projects. I would question if all 3 will get built. I'll just leave it at that, and I think you can connect the dots. I think the Summit one is much closer to being a project. I think they're in the 70% of acquiring their property already. And they've said they do not want to use eminent domain. They hope to complete their project without that. And a couple of the other pipelines have just thrown that out there that you sell to us or we'll use eminent domain. So I think the tone, I guess, between them is not the same, and that might be part of the reason why 1 or 2 or maybe all 3 won't get completed. So.
Thanks a lot.
Hi, I'm Sam Walton, and I'm a transgender Iowan. Right now, there are 27 bills working their way through the Iowa legislature designed to discriminate against us. Everything from bathroom bills to book bans to laws that strip away our legal protections and restrict what medicines we can access. One in particular restricts gender-affirming care to anyone that's under 18. And this is particularly important to me because I'm a foster parent of a transgender teenager, and now I have to explain to him why he has to wait another 2 years to get the medicine that he needs. And this contributes to hundreds of other bills across the country that are designed to discriminate against us and make our lives incrementally harder. Turn the water up just a couple of degrees at a time so that the frog doesn't realize that it's being boiled alive until it's too late. And I guess my question is, why do you hate us? What did we do to deserve this kind of cruelty? We're just regular people trying to live our regular lives, and we just want to be left alone. And why does my son have to get permission from you to get a certain kind of medicine? That's my question.
We don't hate you. The bills that have been introduced, and most of them have been in the House, so I'll speak briefly and let Jeff and Alina, they're more aware of the bills because they've come from the House. We don't hate transgenders. And I don't believe any of those bills are really aimed at adult transgenders. They're aimed at youth and minors. The one thing I brought with me today, because I figured this question would come up, is an article. Please look her up. Her name is Jamie, Jamie Reed. It was in the Free Press. I'll read just the heading of the article. It's an awesome article, very informative. I thought I was saving trans kids, and now I'm blowing the whistle. There are more than 100 pediatric gender clinics across the country. When I read that, I was blown away. I figured it had been a handful. But there's more than 100 pediatric gender clinics. That's gender-changing clinics for kids.
100, that's about 2 per state.
Yeah, I'm blown away that there's 100 pediatric child gender-changing clinics in the United States. Yeah, 2 per state. Again, I'm pretty astonished by that. 2 per state. That's.
Well, how many do you think
Let
we
me
need
finish.
for each state?
Sure, let me finish,
Okay.
please. Okay. What's happening to children is morally and medically appalling. I am a 42-year-old St. Louis native, a queer woman, and politically I am to the left of Bernie Sanders. Okay, that's the setup to this article. She is a queer woman, not saying that anything wrong. I mean, that's her position. And she says she's to the left of Bernie Sanders, okay? She's not this is not being wrote or drafted by a conservative person. My worldview has deeply shaped my career. She goes on and talks in this very eye-opening article about what's happening. And it's not. Read the article, and anybody that questions on this, I think you will see a little bit different perspective. You may not agree with the views that we have, but you will see the concerns and why some of the safeguards have been introduced to protect our youth until they're to the age of 18. And as a fellow spoke with me earlier today, you know, in Iowa, it's still illegal to have a tattoo until the age of 18. Why? Because it's permanent. And the people in Iowa do not believe that someone under the age of 18 has enough mental capacity to make a permanent life-altering decision. But yet, we're wanting to look past a tattoo, and they can have a sex change. They can cut their breasts off. They can remove their genitals. I mean, that's what we're talking about. It's not an attack on transgender people, as you mentioned, sir. It's trying to put some safeguards in protecting kids. When they reach the age of 18, they're an adult, okay? But they're minors, they're kids. They're kids. If you think that should be okay, if you think this should be okay, then you need to be going out and saying, get rid of the tattoo laws, because kids can surely get a tattoo if we think it's okay for them to want a sex change. If you think that's okay, you should be out there promoting that they should be able to smoke at the age of 14. I mean, why is it asinine that a child cannot smoke until they're 18, but you think it's okay, or somebody that thinks it's okay for them to have a sex change under that age?
Nobody thinks that.
All right.
Go ahead.
So thank you, Sam, for the question. I know we talked about this a little bit a couple weeks ago. You brought up a lot of points. I'll try to touch on a few of them. This is obviously a very important conversation. This is dealing with human identity and how humans perceive themselves, perceive others, and ensuring that we can all enjoy a lifetime of health and happiness, which we certainly all deserve. I don't know anyone that hates transgender people. I haven't seen anything from the legislature that would suggest that. I would say that rhetoric is very unhelpful to the discussion and likely exacerbates a lot of the mental stress around these issues. I'll just dig in. I mean, you mentioned book bans was the term you used. The books that we've been talking about are books that encourage children to look at pornography. are books that illustrate graphic depictions of sodomy and sex acts targeted at children, where even very liberal people, I'll show them the illustrations, they'll say, Jeff, you're absolutely right, that doesn't belong in schools. So to think that we're targeting books as some sort of hate campaign is absolutely absurd, unless you're taking the position that it's your human right to show children pornography. In that case, we need to talk about that. So obviously you're very interested in the gender affirming care piece. Thank you, Senator Dickey, for bringing up Jamie Reed. There was another article on the Free Press that corroborated a lot that was within that affidavit. I have not seen the gender care advocates really address the concerns that have been brought forward, either in the lawsuit from the Tavistock Clinic or which is now being investigated by the Missouri Attorney General's office, because these are very, very serious concerns. A children who identifies as an inanimate object, why would that kid qualify for puberty blockers? This is a phenomenon we have in our community as well. This isn't just San Francisco, where the identity disorders are deteriorating. So 10 years ago, it was, okay, I'm a boy, now I'm a girl, now I'm a boy. 5 years ago, we now have this non-binary phenomenon where, okay, I'm not sure what I am, but I'm not a girl, or I'm not a boy. So now you're expanding it quite a bit. And so it's very interesting that when a lot of these puberty suppressors and hormones, when these treatments were investigated and initially explored, it was really just for cross-sex phenomenon. So all this non-binary stuff that's been recent is, I mean, I think The Economist, the term they used is worryingly weak. This was an article that was published in The Economist yesterday. I think the headline was that the evidence for gender-affirming care for minors is worryingly weak, because in all honesty, it has not really been studied at all, and people are pretending like it has been. There are people who will say that cross-sex hormones are reversible or puberty blockers are reversible. Those statements are not true, or they're not fully true. Arguably, a puberty blocker may be partially reversible if you're willing to endure long-term bone side effects and things that really do affect a person long-term. The problem is that the way these treatments are being advocated or recommended use are not reversible at all. And so when I hear someone who says, oh, I want to give my kid this reversible treatment, and I said, well, wait a minute, who told you that treatment is reversible? Because that's an extremely controversial and I think false statement. So again, there's just so much misinformation, and Dr. Mborick herself from the LGBTQ clinic was contributing to this, where she can't provide a straight answer. If you ask her a question straight out of the WPATH Standards of Care, version 8, if you say, hey, Dr. Mborick, what are you doing to prepare for a detransition, which is stated in your standard of practice and care that you must do? She can't provide an answer for that, and she pretends like she doesn't know what they're talking about. So it's just amazing when you actually read WPATH, which for those who aren't aware, WPATH is like the transgender Bible, the supposed science that supports all of this. But when you read it, they admit that not a lot is known, that these phenomenons are not well studied, that longitudinal studies don't exist. So for instance, in this case, if there was a young child and if they were told this treatment is experimental, your suicide and depression might persist, and in fact the transition might exacerbate your mental health stress, and that there could be other adverse effects. If the treatment was being presented in that way, that would be one thing. And this is interesting because this is literally what the London Court of Justice ruled in your hearing about this. And the question was, does a 16-year-old actually have the mental capacity to provide informed consent to a therapy of this nature? And the judge said no, they didn't. And one of the reasons why is because the therapies were not being properly portrayed to the patient. They were saying things like, oh, there's scientific evidence for this, when there really isn't. They were saying, oh, we've been studying puberty blockers, they've been on the markets for decades. Yeah, but this is an off-label use and they haven't been authorized this way. If the manufacturer or whoever wants to use puberty blockers to suppress puberty in transgender use, they should seek a medical license from the FDA to do so. They should not be using these products off-label for things that are far beyond what they were intended. Precocious puberty is a different medical condition than gender dysphoria. Being non-binary is different from being cross-sex, and now we have kids identifying as inanimate objects. Inanimate objects. David, it would be hilarious if it wasn't so sad to these children's mental health. And someone's putting an idea in these kids' heads that if you identify as an inanimate object, you have a right to be affirmed and validated no matter what. And if anyone refuses to affirm your identity as an inanimate object, oh, they're just hateful and they're emotionally abusing you. Come on, people, we don't have to be geniuses to see how this is getting off the rails so quickly. The bottom line for me is I don't believe that you can be born in the wrong body. I haven't seen any objective evidence that that's true. The only objective criteria for a gender dysphoria diagnosis, and Dr. Mboric will tell you this, the only objective diagnostic criteria for giving a young kid puberty, or an adult for that matter, is that the patient expresses a desire for these treatments. There's nothing else that they can objectively diagnose for what would say this patient has gender dysphoria and needs this treatment and this one doesn't. It's really just completely up to the patient. So the standard of care and practice, why the legislature needs to be involved is because the standard of care and practice is in doubt. That's why you have Sweden, Denmark, the Netherlands, Norway most recently, Belgium most recently. More countries are following the lead of what Iowa has done. Iowa, I think, is one of 20 states that have taken this direction. Florida did it through their Board of Medicine, where they had the doctors from Finland and these other places testify. So we're trying to follow the science. It's just so interesting how some people are really insisting, how much they want to insist that young children, because this is the theory, right? They say, we need radical gender ideology in preschools and kindergarten because a preschooler will have a formation of their gender identity, and the worst outcome is that a kid goes through puberty in their opposite sex that's not aligned with their gender. Therefore, every young child in their reproductive curriculum needs to know about puberty blockers. The other thing is amazing. These conditions don't exist in the developing world because these treatments are so expensive. This is a mental health contagion that seems to most affect upper middle class young women, where they're seeking some sort of victimization, some sort of identity status that, because there's a lot to this. Abigail Schreier, I would hope you've read Abigail Schreier. She's done a lot of great work as an investigative journalist. Again, someone who's not a conservative, someone who used to work and advocate for Planned Parenthood. So again, whether it's Jamie Reed, whether it's Abigail Schreier, these are not, whether it's J.K. Rowling, these are not conservative voices that are raising the alarm. These are women that have investigated and followed the stories, and nobody cared anything about transgenders until you started targeting children. Until the American Medical Association and these other groups insisted that young children need to learn about puberty blockers, again, a medical product that is an off-label use, has never been studied for use in gender dysphoria, yet somehow it's a human right for children to have access to these drugs? I don't think so. I think that's absurd. I think it's dangerous. So we're hoping to protect children. And the other thing is there is a growing chorus of people who've undergone these operations and have regretted it and are suing the people that have offered it. So the state of Iowa recently said we wanted to limit the damages, the non-economic damages related to medical malpractice. Well, we certainly have medical malpractice because Dr. Mboric can't even answer a question out of her standards of practice and care. So if the state's going to limit those damages of non-economic damages, we need to make sure medical malpractice is not sanctioned in the state of Iowa, because I care a lot about patients. The practice of medicine of do no harm is very, very important. And so until there is a system to track long-term outcomes, an honest appraisal of that the patient is properly informed of what these therapies are and what they aren't, and yeah, a lot of people do commit suicide post-transition, including in this community. So unless all these kind of circumstances are met where a patient understands the truth, there's a system to track long-term outcomes, then no, we can't. The University of Iowa does not exist to perform medical experiments on children. I'm sorry, it doesn't. So I know I've said a lot, but to me it boils down to I do not believe that you can be born in a wrong body. I think maybe there are some instances where patients have had a successful experience. I think they're few and far between. So again, this is an ongoing conversation. Obviously, the transgender phenomenon isn't going away. I'd love to speak about all the other different bills, but I'll just end by saying that gender diverse people, transgenders, they have every civil right, every legal protection under the law. In some ways, they're more legally protected than I am, because if I tried to do any of those things to children, if I tried to show children the books that some of the transgenders are showing children, I'd be put in jail for obscenity to children. If I tried to go into the women's restroom, I'd be a sex offender. So transgender people enjoy a wide range of legal protection. Iowa's a very tolerant state. It's in our civil rights code. I think the civil rights code does need some clarification and cleaning up. I don't think gender identity should exist and be treated the same way as race. I think a black person sitting at a lunch counter is very different than a transgender woman seeking a double mastectomy. I think those are different things, therefore the law should treat them differently. I think there is, again, I mean, even disability is protected. So if someone needs accommodation for their gender dysphoria, they're entitled to that under the law, so far as it does not provide an undue burden or affect the life, liberty, or happiness of anyone else. And so I think that's more than fair. I think it's the best system of freedom that we have in this nation. I would celebrate, again, I want every person to express their identity as they see fit, but we need to have the truth. And men are men, women are women. These are different things. These words have meanings. And we can't just make everything up based on our feelings. I mean, we have to live in a real world, and we have to have these boundaries. I think that's the big thing that the transgender movement's wanting to do. They want to erase all the boundaries, right? And if a young child can consent to having their body surgically altered, I think Senator Dickey's point is, should they be able to consent to a tattoo? Should they be able to consent to smoke? Should they be able to consent to sexual activity? I think that's something I've said, is that if someone's too young to be having sex, they're certainly too young to be changing their sex or engaging in any of these permanent changing medical procedures. So I went on for a while. There's a lot more I could talk about this. I'm very interested in the construction of civil rights law to make sure that every human being in Iowa is treated with dignity and fairness. I think we're doing a great job. But I think there are a lot of other issues to make sure we need to address and get to the root of this. And just the last thing for real this time, the reason why the 100 gender clinics is such an important figure, because 15 years ago it was 2. So this is a brand new medical phenomenon. Don't try to tell me this is not new. This is on the cutting edge of what's known, and we need to be really, really careful. And I would just extremely caution people to boil down the rhetoric. Nobody hates you. We're just trying to get down to the truth, and we're just trying to create a system where people can form identities that lead to a lifetime of health and happiness. So I hope we can all work together on that.
My turn? Okay. Sam, this issue is the single issue why I got involved into politics. In June of 2021, we had a 15-year-old girl go topless at the Pella public pool because she identified as a boy. And our city council, of course, it's a city pool, and so at the next city council meeting, it was wall-to-wall people. So full that there were many people standing outside. It was overflow crowd out the back door. A lot of people were upset because they felt that something needed to be done about that, that young developing girls shouldn't be going around topless in public places. We already have laws against nudity and exposure and things like that. But our Pella City Council agreed and voted that night not to take any action. And of course, you can imagine that didn't sit well with a lot of community members. And so a group was formed called Protect My Innocence, which sole purpose was to inform people and have a discussion and educate about all of these issues that we've just talked about. I've only been doing this for 12 weeks, something like that. I don't know. They all start running together. And almost every single weekend that I have come home, I have spent with the LGBT community. I've spent with transgender young men, lesbians, P-flag group, I have a lot of conversations with them, and they've said some of the same exact things that you have said. Why are you attacking us? Why do you hate us? Because of the votes that I have taken, I have fully supported the bills that would require schools to remove pornography out of them. I know you want to call that book banning, but those books aren't being banned. It's simply saying, in a school, in a public school, a government school, please just stick to education, academics. Please stick to writing, reading, history, things like that. And I have thoroughly enjoyed these conversations with the LGBT community. But I've also been noticing that there's a perception there, a perception that just isn't true, that they perceive what exactly that you have said. And I continue to meet with them because I don't want them to believe that it's not true. And a lot of the stuff that Jeff just said, Representative Shipley, about a lot of the studies, or the research that has gone into this, it's incredible. You know, when you destabilize a child by causing them to question their very identity, it sets them up for great manipulation and even political manipulation. I want to read to you, Gays Against Groomers is a group that I follow online. And they're made of thousands and thousands of homosexuals, lesbians, transgender, bisexual, lots of different, everything under the acronym. And here's what they say, which is also the conversation that Lesbians United has shared, detransitionersvoices.org. Our community that once preached love and acceptance of others has been hijacked by radical activists who are now pushing extreme concepts onto society, specifically targeting children in recent years. Gays Against Groomers directly opposes the sexualization and indoctrination of children. This includes drag queen story hours, drag shows involving children, the transitioning and medicalization of minors, and gender theory being taught in the classroom. Like Senator Dickey said, that's not a Republican, conservative, biblical, necessarily person speaking there. That is a group that is an LGBT group. And even within that own community, they see the harm. They see the harm in this. And as legislators, as we take votes and we take a stand to protect children, to protect innocence, I'm proud to be able to do that. I'm proud to be able to just protect common sense and what I believe is safe for children. And I just want to challenge us all as we think about this whole topic. When we question our identities, you know, I'll confess to you first and foremost that my identity is found not in my race, that I'm white, that I'm blonde, that I'm a woman. I have chosen for my identity to be found in Christ and in Christ alone. So we all get to choose that. We all get to choose how we define our own identity. So be very careful when we start destabilizing young children's identity. Parents, we have fought hard for parents' rights. Parents are in charge. And I appreciate this issue. I will continue to talk about this issue a lot. And Thank you for bringing that question up, Sam.
Okay. On the subject of carbon definition and status by the government. Okay, and that's assuming carbon is on the, we know carbon's on the periodic table, so it shouldn't be changeable. But if it is separated out to industrial versus natural, we could still clean that up. So is it possible to get a group together to claim back that definition of carbon, that it is not a hazardous element?
Well, I assume you're directing that to the comments I made earlier. I mean, yeah, you could do that. You could pass legislation to stop it. But the point is that the project started under the law as it was. That's where the hiccup is. If the definition of carbon was what it was, or is what it is, whatever, and that's how the project started, that's where the problem is. You can change wherever you want now, but it only affects now moving forward. So that's the problem, even with some opposition or not opposition, excuse me, concern with the bill from the House is that's, you know, that goes in enactment on the day that the governor signs it into law. I mean, if we got to that point, but that doesn't go, you know, it's not retroactive. You can't pass legislation like that that's retroactive. So that's where the problem is.
I would think that something is either right or wrong or correct or incorrect, and that's what, maybe we should change our laws. It should be based on that type of thing, but.
I actually did have a bill draft to delete the term liquefied carbon dioxide from, I think it's 479B, which is the code section that I guess they would apply for eminent domain under. Anyway, I needed to follow up with the Sierra Club attorney because it's one of those things when you kind of draft law, sometimes your bill can have the opposite effect. So my bill just deleted that phrase from the code, and then I think what I heard is that, okay, that actually would have made it easier because then they no longer would have been regulated under this particular chapter. So I guess I still need to have some more, I'm not a utility lawyer, and it is kind of tough to understand some of these things, but we did try to go about that, or at least start that conversation, and it proved to be just slightly more difficult than we were expecting, just because of the way the laws are currently constructed.
Well, and to add to that, when we talk about carbon dioxide specifically, they're gonna pull that as a whole and put that under pressure, 2200 psi. So it's a gas. You put it under pressure and you force it to be almost a liquid. Okay, not quite. I'm on the Environmental Protection Committee, and we just had the organization that oversees all of this, the federal organization, come and speak to us, and they used a little bit different terminology because it's not quite a true liquid, but it's classified as hazardous because it is dangerous, it is an asphyxiant, so we all know that it's heavier than air, regular air, and so it settles in low places. And we've seen that example in Mississippi. What was the name of that town?
When it exploded?
Yeah.
Louisiana.
Oh, it was Louisiana? Okay, he'll look it up for me. So there has been an accident down south already, and what occurred with that one was a landslide that caused the eruption of the carbon pipeline. And the organization that came and spoke to us said that what went wrong in that particular one was the fact that the pipeline company did not foresee the potential landslide. Okay, so when they placed these, they need to think about every possible thing that could go wrong. And in Iowa, one of the things that can go wrong is you put a pipeline underground. Let's say you put it 12 inches or 2 foot underground. Our soil does what? It moves around, it gets eroded, we have some issues with that, and so there have been pipelines that have become exposed. But these can be, because they're in high pressure and you've got temperature differences there, now you've got a little bit of problems with control of that temperature and that pressure. So certainly, they know that it's an asphyxiant. It settles in low places. Even vehicles can't start because, you know, our gasoline vehicles need oxygen to run. So I think when you talk about that issue, you guys, it is listed as hazardous, and that is one of the main concerns why people do not want carbon pipelines.
You're right, it was Mississippi.
Mississippi, okay. All right, good question. Yeah, I don't know that we can go any further with that. Besides, I would maybe challenge us that when we pass laws, we change a lot of times what's been done in the past. That's what we do, you know. People, and this is what businesses do, you know, you're going this way in this direction, and then a law gets changed, so now you gotta change and kind of go in this direction. So I don't know that just because, hey, we got this far in this project, you don't get to stop us. I guess I would challenge that idea a little bit, that that shouldn't just be an excuse to continue forward without hearing the people, because there's a pretty clear opposition in Iowa to the carbon pipelines. Okay.
So I apologize for being late, and I understand that the first question was about property taxes. And this is a big issue here in Jefferson County all of a sudden because of our assessing gone up dramatically. My property went up 45% after being here for 30 years, and without any improvements over the last 20 plus years. And so I had a very nice meeting with our county assessor, and I understand the issue better, but I'm still trying to catch up. And one of the things that he pointed out is that they have nothing to do with the tax part of the equation. You guys do. And that the millage that has been applied to our assessments.
Just one second, that's not us, that's your local taxing entity, being a city, your county supervisors, that's not the state level.
Okay.
So go ahead.
So you guys have nothing to do with the millage aspect of the equation?
No.
Okay. That.
Well, go ahead and keep asking your question. I mean.
Well, this is my question.
Okay.
So, you know, if I have that wrong, I apologize, but as I say, I'm still trying to catch up with the situation. And I believe that that's what it was, that is what I was told, is that this is actually decided on the state legislature side. And so if that's incorrect, that's fine. You know, I'll dig further elsewhere. What I know is that currently our millage rate is at 56%, and that's coming down to 54%. And there was some issue with the state legislature about that, and that I'm unclear about. But there was a conversation with the assessor that this may actually be dropped into the 40%. Now, I don't know, as I say, a lot. I'm still trying to catch up. This is brand new to me. It was off my radar, but it's suddenly really on my radar. And I think it's on the radar of an awful lot of people around here. And I'd like to know what you guys know and what you can do, if you can do anything. And so that's my question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and not just in Jefferson County, in the entire state, it's a big issue, right? Yes, the millage rate does have, boy, we could spend hours on just on this. There's some indicators coming out that we don't know what that new suggested rate is going to be. I've heard as low as 40, I've heard 49, 48, somewhere in that range. That we do have input on. The reply that I made earlier was just because your valuation goes up doesn't mean that your property taxes are necessarily going to go up. That's again back to your taxing authority. They have a lot of input on that because they can adjust those rates down. But Jeff,
you said something about 56%.
Yes, that's what I understand it is right now.
Okay, I believe, so what you may be thinking of is the assessed value versus actual taxable value.
We're talking about the taxable value.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
the taxable value is at 56% at this particular point.
That's correct.
Yeah, and our assessed values, as I say, they went up dramatically. Some of the people I know have it up 58% on their properties.
I believe you have a supervisor right behind you. If you let him share the mic, he could probably give a little background as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, don't mean to put you on the spot, Chad.
Yeah.
I think it's you. It's hard to see the lights.
No, my name's Chad White. I'm from Henry County. I think what you're talking about, sir, is the rollback rates.
Yes.
And the rollback rates are 56%. They have been talking more 0.56. It's a 5 decimal point, brought out 5 points. That's a multiplier that is applied to the assessed value to come up with the tax value asking for that property. So yeah, your property value may have risen, but the thought is the rollback rate will be adjusted and it won't be such a 46% or 45% increase on your property tax.
Okay.
If that makes any sense.
Well,
But-
that makes more
and
sense.
I think the representative up there made a comment about the informational sheet that is available. That has a ton of information on it.
Good.
It'd be well worthwhile to at least read it or print it out because it makes, it's one of them dry reading type things. To read down through that, it kind of explains some of that stuff. So I think that might be of help.
Well, and then I guess just short answer to that is I think, at least as I've been up there, and now it's getting more serious, but we have to find ways to work together to bring that down. And I mean, we need to be taking a look at our local budgets. We need to be involved in our local government, and at least at the state level, making sure that values are being fairly assessed and that the levies are reasonable. So yeah, we really appreciate you bringing that forward, and it's certainly something we've heard a lot about this last week, and I think we talked for an hour and a half in our caucus on the various property tax ways that could potentially address this. Obviously, anything we do at the state level to reduce property tax could come back and cause problems for local governments. So making sure that we get everyone on the same page and hopefully build strong consensus on what is it that we want our local governments to be doing and how much property tax do we think is fair or reasonable. We got to figure it out.
And I got a question for the supervisor. Actually, can we go this way with the question for once? It says in here, gentlemen and ladies, at one time, tax levy rates were expressed in mils per dollar. Now, a levy is simply an imposed tax, right? And all levies locally include like city and school. They are imposed by your local officials. So then it also says 1 mil equals 1/10 of a cent and 1/1000 of a dollar, converting the millage rate to dollars and cents per 1,000. So 1 mil is equals $1 per $1,000 of assessed value. So my question is, since it says at one time tax levy rates were expressed in mils, do you guys on a local level still use millage, or do you just use other language?
I've been a supervisor for 2 years now, so millage has not been part of the vocabulary that we use. It's thought of as just asking dollar figures per $1,000 valuation of the property.
Super.
I think there's a lot cleaner language use. I mean, everybody can relate to a dollar, and everybody can relate then to the valuation of the property and everything. So.
Yes, super. We all need this. Everybody send me, if you sign up my email for emails afterwards, I'll come up to me and we'll get your email and we'll get this to all of us because it is really, really good.
And Henry County doesn't have a dog in the fight with the pipelines or anything like that, thankfully, but something that I'm asking as a question, eminent domain, most people think of eminent domain as a highway. They think of it as a sewer lagoon or a well system or some common public use type of infrastructure piece, right? I understand that these companies are private companies, private corporations and everything. Is that right?
They are.
And I've also learned or have heard, and I guess I'm asking for confirmation, are these facilities going to have offloading depots available for them so they can sell that product out to manufacturing? Because everybody that drinks a bottle of pop, that, when you open that bottle of pop, you're getting you're getting a
Carbon
dose of it
dioxide.
right there, so are they gonna be able to back a truck up, offload some of that hazardous product that is being transported and sell that then?
Yes, according to Iowa Press, if you guys go to Iowa Press, they just did an interview with Jess Mazur of the Sierra Club, and also with Summit, the PR gal, the main gal. And her answer to that very question was yes, there will be spots and they can pull out this. And I did not know that until then either, because all of these tax credits, the 45Q, are supposed to go to the capture and sequestration of carbon and put into, underground storage. So the conversation has been evolving a little bit as we've moved through time. So yes, according to this interview that was just done yesterday, or perhaps the day before, the answer would be yes.
Okay. So I think that's what rubs a lot of people wrong is, using eminent domain to further my business enterprise so I can sell a product on down the road type thing, I'm sure trucking companies would like a loading dock set up for them, or whatever the circumstances would be. It just doesn't fit the eminent domain that everybody has pictured in their mind. So I also had a question, and Senator brought this up earlier about what services county residents, city residents expect for their property taxes. With diminishing property taxes, that puts the onus back on the county supervisors, the city municipality councils, things like that, to ask for enough revenue generated through the property taxes to support the services that everybody has been used to receiving. So, whether that be road repairs, in above and beyond what the federal money is paying for, trash collection, any of the little pet projects that services, like in Henry County, we use some of the lost money to pay for our rural garbage collection and transportation. One, that way it doesn't end up in our ditches, because we value our cleanliness and things like that in the, we don't want a bunch of garbage picked up. But that's something that residents have to be willing to ask, yeah, my property taxes might drop, but there's an opposite reaction to everything, right? I think we've been taught that for a long time. If there's not enough money to pay for things, what services are we willing to see decreasing? Or what is that balancing act? And that's where the municipal city councils and mayors and those people have to do on the county level. That's where the county supervisors, they have these hard questions. Do we ask for money? Are we using money on the mental health thing? There was a tax burden put on the county to pay for mental health. That's being taken away now by the state. So some counties were able to reduce that amount, where others kept it where it is, so we could continue to pick up and catch up on some of the things that have been diminished over time. That road use, that we're putting more gravel on the road, or whatever the case be. So it's a give and take and a play. So bottom line, I just want to let everybody know that your county supervisors aren't just money grabbing. It's all a balancing act of trying to figure out how to best serve the counties and everything. So thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And give them a round of applause, you guys. I do not envy those people that have to set these budgets. Wow. Well, we get to do that. But seriously, guys, it's a lot like your home budget. You know how much you're going to be bringing in this year, and you know what your expenses are. How can you reduce those expenses so that you have a little bit more play? It's always running the numbers. So some of the levies that are in place right now in your county include education, a city, a county levy, a township levy, a county hospital. So when you get your tax paper, look at those. There's usually about, what, 6 of them, I think? And one of the bills that I've been spending a lot of time working on this year is to not put emergency management as a separate levy. They want to do they want to levy you across the state for additional funds. And in Mahaska County, we pay $1.2 million on our emergency management already. And not that we all don't value our ambulance and our police and our fire departments and all of that, but Emergency Management Commission is specifically in existence to draw up plans for, say, natural disasters. That's their purpose. That's why they were created. So you already fund locally your fire, your ambulance, and your police. You fund all that locally. And so emergency management is sort of a separate entity that has been kind of growing and growing and putting a lot of burden on counties, including ours. So we've been trying to figure out how to have a good conversation with them about that so that we can be able to respond to natural disasters, but not break everybody's back financially in the meantime. So, yeah, keep talking to your supervisors. They work hard. Thank you for your service.
Hi, Tom O'Donnell from Keosauqua, and I'm hesitant to bring up the transgender issue again because Representative Shipley clearly has more time to devote to researching this than I do, and so I'm sure he's got a lot of data and studies and things that he can cite. But in his statement regarding this issue, I heard a lot of, I heard at least a few straw men, a few distortions, a few true facts. But it's like I can only pick out a couple regarding the tattoo issue. When we're talking, first of all, my understanding is that neither of the two pediatric transgender clinics are doing genital surgery. And my understanding also is that they may perhaps do some top surgery, that is breast removal, breast reduction, whatever. However, cisgender kids are also getting breast augmentation and breast reduction too, underage. So, you know, that type of surgery is not uncommon among cisgender kids. Why should it be banned for transgender kids? Regardless, so we're really talking about an issue that's, when it comes to genital surgery or irreversible treatments, that's not really happening in Iowa. If this was a big issue and patients were regretting or thought that they'd been misled or whatever regarding this treatment, there have been no lawsuits, and this type of treatment's been provided in Iowa for years. There's been no lawsuits charging malpractice. There's been no lawsuits accusing doctors of misleading them, and I see Representative Shipley loosening up to come at me about this. There have been no complaints to the Iowa Board of Medical Examiners charging that doctors have behaved unethically regarding transgender treatment. So this seems like the people who have actually had this treatment seem happy with it. There's nobody that's come forward to say in Iowa, you know, suing some doctor because they mistreated them. The tattoo thing, no kid or adult even is going to go get this kind of surgery without psychological evaluation, without consultation with a doctor, without consultation with parents. It's not the same thing as a tattoo. This is a medical treatment. If a 17-year-old had a brain tumor and the parents, for some reason, religious or whatever, says, no, you can't get that kind of treatment, that child would have a right to go to court to seek that treatment. And that may be what happens if a child is under 18 and the parents say, no, you're not going to get transgender affirming care. The child has a right to seek the care that their doctor and that they have been told is right for them, okay? The state does not have a role in refusing that kind of treatment. But as I said, in Iowa, my understanding is it's pretty much a moot point. Kids are not getting genital surgery in Iowa. The tattoo thing, it's just such different situations. One's a life-saving, potentially life-saving treatment. The other one is getting something put on your body, okay? My son has about 10 tattoos. He put them all on himself, okay, before he was 18. The Jamie Reed, I forget her name anyway, case, Senator Dickey, I read the same column. You'll note that they didn't go to the clinic to get their side of this, to try to say, okay, she says this, what's your defense? They didn't do that in that essay. I would recommend you also look for the St. Louis Post-Dispatch's examination of her accusations, because they talked to patients and families that actually were at the Washington University Pediatric Gender Care Clinic and found none of them with any kind of complaints. Well, the question is, you have to understand why the gentleman who was here earlier believes that you hate them, is because these laws, one after another, are going after them. So why? I have to believe that in some cases it is a cynical attempt to find a wedge issue to arouse voters. Do you agree or disagree? I guess that's the question.
So, again, thank you for pouring more gasoline on this discussion. You covered a lot of different things. No.
You did too.
I know. And this is an important discussion, and hopefully maybe we can come back in May and June and have a 2-hour-long thing just dedicated to this topic, because we haven't even talked about that schools have to be honest with parents, right? We passed a bill that said schools cannot deliberately withhold information or provide false information to children, or to parents. And everyone's up in arms that, if schools are required to tell the truth, somehow kids are going to kill themselves. I mean, that's literally the state of the discussion right now. It's interesting because you said yourself, this is a moot point because it isn't happening. And I'd say from our research, hearing from the physicians on why the bottom surgeries aren't happening, is just because that procedure is just so gruesome and so dangerous that's kind of one of the last kind of, obviously it's pretty far down the road of gender transition, but mastectomies on minors are happening. And so
is breast augmentation, and so is breast reduction.
Right, now, so I think...
And that, sir, is definitely different than changing their sex.
Right. So,
okay, it's apples and oranges, a comparison you're trying to make.
Then why not ban all breast surgery on minors? Are they capable of making that decision too?
Please let Representative Shipley answer your question. We let you have the mic for
about
about 9 minutes.
Saying things like that.
Thank you.
9 minutes you had the mic. Please let him answer.
So thank you, Senator. Thank you, Tom. So the legal questions are, what is the method for informed consent? That when someone is agreeing to a medical treatment, what is their understanding of that treatment? What information is provided to them? So that's one. And then the other legal question is, what is the standard of care that governs any particular practice of medicine? So the standard of care basically it can refer to the existing medical literature within any different branch of science. It can also refer to how does a reasonable practitioner in a similar situation address the situation. So when you have people in Denmark, people in Netherlands, or Denmark, Sweden, or Florida, when the medical community does not approach the problem in the same way, then therefore a standard of practice of care that could be uniformly applied across all patients does not exist. So just to be clear, the practice of medicine originates from the legislature. So the General Assembly has that power. we form the Board of Medicine. The Senate approves the appointees to the Board of Medicine. So all the practice of licensure, it all flows from the legislature. So if there's a medical practice happening in Iowa that can likely cause more harm than good, then absolutely the legislature, it's incumbent on us to weigh the facts and to discern and to pass this law. So it's just interesting. So those are the questions. So under a standard of practice of care and under informed consent of the patient, yeah, a child, and again, I don't know the extent that it's happening, and certainly if it's happening for superficial or for reasons of vanity, I would have a lot of hesitations to it. But certainly, so I don't even know to the extent that young people are getting breast augmentations in the state. I don't think they would be allowed to do so for purely cosmetic things. I don't know the circumstances if it's exactly as you described. But again, nobody is hating anyone. And for that particular person who wants to give their kid that they're guardian of gender affirming care, that person in another conversation, they're saying that these things are reversible when they're not. So again, this person, if you listen to them, they will demonstrate exactly why the state needed to step in, because they do not have an accurate understanding of what these therapies do and don't do and the harm that they cause. So yeah, there is a lot of data out there. Again, even a straightforward question. This is how we know for sure that patients are not getting the full picture. Because I would say to Dr. Mboric, what is the rate of detransition? If you say how many, if 1,000 patients undergo this, how many of them are likely for the therapy to not work, right? Like, what is the rate of efficacy? They can't provide any information on that. One, because they don't have a system to track long-term patient outcomes. So every statement you made of, oh, no one's complaining about this, no one's having any problems in Iowa, you can't actually make that statement. Dr. Mboric can't make that statement because there is no system in place to actually track patient outcome. If that system was in place, I think we'd be a lot more comfortable with these things. But just lastly, on this rate of detransition, why it's important is because in the standard of practice of care, there are figures there. So in the literature, there are figures. But when you ask Dr. Mboric or when you ask Representative Baith, who's also a doctor, they'll pull out figures out of their butt. They'll say, oh, 1 in 1,000, or oh, this is very seldom, or exceedingly rare, or never happens. Yet when you actually read the literature, they'll say maybe as low as 2% if you're following the actual Dutch protocol, which nobody is. Which they actually admit in the literature that we've strayed so far from what Netherlands has done 20 years ago. But they'll even say as high as 14%, and then the literature they'll admit that they don't know because there's been no cohort study studying that phenomenon. So they'll admit they don't know, yet some people, they'll pretend like they do know. And they'll give you figures that do not reflect what's actually in the medical literature. So there's all these examples that are all around us of how people do not have the accurate information. They're being led by activists. They're being led by emotional appeals. And I think that's what's so sad to me is because we want to follow the science, and yet we're being drowned out instead of taking hey, let's review the literature. Let's really talk about suicide and what's known and unknown, and how can we really provide therapies that support these children long term. Instead of having those conversations, we're just all in this ideological echo chamber, and it's the ideology that has driven any sort of scientific exploration out. And even again, when you look at doctors like Lisa Lippman in Brown University, who tries to publish papers on this and gets shouted down by radical transgender activists. That's the state of the science right now, is anyone who expresses any sort of concern is viciously attacked as somehow putting children in harm's way. And one, it's not true, and two, it's debilitating to getting truthful information to people. So I would challenge a lot of kind of what you said, and I think that's what we need, is we need accurate information. And if we don't have accurate information, we need to be extremely cautious, especially when we're talking about children. And that's what's so incredible is how, and again, I have my own reservations for adults. I mean, same thing if you're doing this on adults. You should have a system in place to track long-term outcomes. But we're talking about children and a 16-year-old girl thinking, oh, do you want to chop your breasts off? Oh, it's medically affirming. And the last thing, you hit on a very important point, because some people are talking about parental consent. Why don't parents have the right to do this? But as you said, if it's truly life-affirming care, as some people would have us believe, a parent does not have the right to refuse that to a kid. So we can clearly see the world that Democrats want to build, where schools are keeping secrets from parents, and where parents would not actually have the right to prevent a gender-affirming operation for their child, because it would be, Child Protective Services would call that emotional abuse. And if this truly is life-affirming care, then nothing should prevent a kid from getting these operations. So it's not even a slippery slope, it's a trap door. And again, this transgender stuff is all about erasing boundaries, in this case, the boundary between parental consent and having these radicals dictate medicine for our entire state or nation. So I'm really happy that the legislature can have, again, we did our government oversight work with Dr. Mboric and the gentleman from Unity Point. We looked at what Sweden published, we looked at Denmark. I read the whole entire Tavistock Gender Clinic lawsuit. So we're doing our work, and I would really appreciate, well, I want him to read these. If we could read Abigail Schreier and talk about it next forum, I think that would be fantastic. So let's all do our research here and talk about it. Thank you.
Perfect. Joe, you have 2 minutes.
I can wrap it up in less than 2 minutes.
I love you.
First of all, thank you for being here this morning, and I applaud you for sitting up there in the hot seats. I've spent countless hours across the street with the supervisors working on budget this year, and they are trying hard not to raise our taxes. All the departments turned in their budgets for the year, and the supervisors took and cut 4% out to try to keep things down. And everybody expects their services, but the only way the county gets them is through taxes. I'm not for raising taxes, but we still have to support all the services. And one place where I think things need to be changed is in this forest reserve. Those that put it in forest reserve, they pay no taxes, but they expect services there of roads, law enforcement, fire protection, and it's one of the Iowa Farm Bureau's resolutions is to put a partial tax on this forest reserve. And I think there was a bill going through, but I think it's died for lack of support. Maybe it's still simmering there, I don't know, but that's one place where things need to change a little bit. I don't really expect any comments from you, but thank you for listening.
Well, thank you.
So thank you. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, and I will make a comment, though, on that. I agree with you 100%. That's been a bill for the last 3 years I've been in the Senate that we've passed out Ways and Means, is trying to tackle that. Unfortunately, that's one of the issues that the House and the Senate disagree on, and it always seems to die in the House. But yes, what Joe's referring to is if you have property, and I think it's over 20 acres, you can choose to put it in a forest reserve at no taxes. And every time it comes up, we get beat up by the Sierra Club and all the environmentalists trying to say we're going to cut down the trees, eliminate the forest, et cetera, et cetera. That's not going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen. But they should be paying taxes to some level like everybody else in the area, because they still have the same services. I've been to forest reserves. I've been a volunteer firefighter for 31 years. I could not count how many grass fires we've been at in areas that have been labeled as a forest reserve. They still require the services. There's roads that go to their property. And yes, there should be a level of taxation on them like every other property owner.
Thank you, everyone in attendance. Thank you to our favorite lawmakers. We will be back here again in 2 weeks on April 22nd for our March makeup. We would like to invite you out to business after hours this Thursday at ISU Extension. The cattlemen will be giving you a free meal. It's a great time to come see all the great things happening at ISU Extension. And then on April 20th, put on your best attire and come to the annual awards banquet. Thank you again to our sponsors this month, the Fairfield Community School District, Freeman Cabanides Law Firm, and the Fairfield Arts and Convention Center. While we did not live stream today, this was recorded and it will be put on FPAC probably on Monday. Thank you, have safe travels, and have a wonderful Easter.